welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Elena Casas. Today we're focusing on defence stocks and my guest is Chris Beauchamp, Chief Market Analyst at IG. Well, Ukraine says it is bracing for a major new Russian offensive this month as the war moves into its second year. Russia is reportedly gathering weapons and equipment on Ukraine's borders, while Kyiv is planning a counter-offensive but is waiting on Western supplies of battle tanks. Germany's plan to quickly assemble 2 battalions of Leopard 2 tanks from European allies is moving slower than planned after Berlin agreed to export tanks last week following months of hesitation. Well, the end of the reluctance of Olaf Scholz's government to allow those exports led the share price of Rheinmetall, which makes the Leopard, to shoot up a week ago. This is the wider Stocks Europe Aerospace and Defence Index. It has gained 20.8% since the war began almost a year ago, as countries pledged major increases in defence spending, including an extra $100 billion to revamp the German military and $400 billion over 6 years from France, although all but 9 of NATO's 30 member countries still aren't meeting the alliance's target of spending 2% of GDP on defence. Top constituents in that index include Airbus, Safran, BAE Systems, Dassault and Rolls-Royce. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Chris Beauchamp of IG. Chris, hi, thanks for joining us. So, the German decision last week is a huge turning point geopolitically, of course, but for the defence industry, does it make much difference?
Probably not in the short term. No, of course, those Leopard tanks had to come from somewhere, even if they're coming from stockpiles. Now, you had an interesting comment last week, Norway deciding to buy more to replenish its stockpile. So there are signs maybe that there's actually concrete spending coming down the line. But of course, with European defence, we know it's always a case of jam tomorrow. Even with a war on, it looks like it's much harder to actually get these big increases in defence spending that seem to be promised earlier in the year.
In other words, do you think most of the run-up in the stock price of defence companies has already happened?
It seems to be, yes. I mean, when the war actually started back in last February, we had quite a bump in those share prices. And then there was, while it declined during the course of the year and then recovered from October along with the broader market, there's still, again, a lot of this news is already priced into the market, if you like. So now investors are understandably waiting to see what kind of actual spending comes down the line from Europe. And it makes sense to expect that, but whether it's in the quantities needed to really get these share prices moving is another matter.
Countries are under a lot of pressure, though, from NATO, from the US, from Eastern European countries that are closer to Russia to increase their spending. Just 9 out of 30 countries, as I said there, are meeting that 2% NATO threshold. Do you think investors should expect that that will move in 2023?
Not this year, I don't think. I think it's further down the line. You've already had, of course, the British revision of its budgets the last couple of years, and while there were big promises in the latest spending review there, those, again, don't seem to be delivered on in the short term. And, of course, for Britain, it's a question of where you spend it. For more continental powers, yes, next year and beyond, but certainly I think for the moment it's a case of just waiting for that news to arrive.
Thus far, of course, it's the US that has supplied the bulk of weaponry to Ukraine. Does that mean it's provided a boost for the US defence industry, from which European manufacturers are comparatively losing out?
To an extent, yes, and of course with so many of the key US missile components, for example, javelins, etc., used in Ukraine, the opening part, their expectations a lot more spending would come through there. Now, we know with the ramping up of tensions elsewhere that the US defence budget will likely get a further boost, if only to help Biden to support himself against an outflanking move by the Republicans. So that's something I think that should see perhaps more news in a shorter space of time than we're getting in Europe.
Let's talk briefly about those rising tensions in other parts of the world, especially in the Asia-Pacific, after this Chinese spy balloon that was shot down at the weekend. For the arms industry, how are you expecting the Asia-Pacific situation to play out?
Well, there we should see more spending, certainly this year and beyond. Japan, of course, is moving away from its post-war pacifist constitution, big increases in defence spending there, making it the third biggest in the world. So that we should see more, because they're the big ticket items that we're seeing suggested by the Japanese Defence Ministry really should move the dial, I think, on those share prices. And you can expect a response from others like South Korea as well, where it's already in train, if you like, and then the Chinese response, and you can then expect it to escalate from there, essentially.
From an investor perspective then, how should one get exposure to the defence industry?
Well, I think it's the US and Asian areas that you're looking for. Of course, the threat of a recession, which has been dialed back remarkably over the past month or so, still looms over all stock sectors at this point in time. So I think there's a lot of questions over whether the valuations you've seen over the past 4 months from that October bounce can be sustained in the short term. So I think that's always the big risk. But if you're looking beyond into 2024 and 25, I think there's more upside to come for these defence stocks.
Well, thanks so much for that insight. Chris Beauchamp, Chief Market Analyst at IG. Well, that was our look at the European defence industry. I'm Elena Casas, and this is Reuters.